You are listening to Verb a Minute, where words do remain.
International human rights law protects and defends human rights which are premised on the fundamental right to life. However, this does not seem to fully translate to a right to decide when should be the end of our lives. More controversial is whether doctors or anyone else has the right to make medically informed decisions about whether death would serve some terminally ill patients better than trying to keep them alive. All these debates were put to the foreground of American society in 1915 when Dr. Haiselden allowed a deformed newborn to die. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the podcast series Right the Wrongs. Every Wednesday and Friday, Right the Wrongs raises public awareness on pressing human rights issues and creates an incubator of activism. Today, we will be discussing the impacts of Dr. Harry J. Haiselden's decisions on popular perceptions of doctor-assisted euthanasia. In the early hours of November 12, 1915, at Chicago's German-American Hospital, Anna Bollinger gave birth to her fourth child, a 7-pound baby boy. The baby was blue and badly deformed. After conferring with the father, the doctor awakened Harry J. Haiselden, the hospital's 45-year-old chief of staff. Haiselden diagnosed a litany of physical defects in the newborn baby. He predicted that, without surgery, the child would not have much time to live. In a decision whose shock waves would ripple from coast to coast and mark a milestone in the history of euthanasia in America, Haiselden advised against surgery. The Bollingers tearfully agreed, and on November 16, Haiselden called a news conference to announce that, rather than operate, he would, I quote, merely stand by passively and let nature complete its bungled job. The child died on November 17, 5 days after his birth, amid growing controversy. Suicide and euthanasia have been rejected or even criminalized throughout history on religious grounds. In the 18th century, for example, despite the temporary Enlightenment toleration of suicide and the decriminalization of it in some states in the U.S., most Americans stopped far short of condoning self-murder. As late as the Civil War period, there existed in the United States a firm consensus on the opposition against suicide and mercy killings. The earliest American statute explicitly outlawing assisted suicide was enacted in New York. Many of the new states and territories followed New York's example. Between 1857 and 1865, a New York commission led by Dudley Field drafted a criminal code that prohibited aiding a suicide and, specifically, furnishing another person with any deadly weapon or poisonous drug, knowing that such person intends to use such weapon or drug in taking his own life. By the time the 14th Amendment was ratified, it was a crime in most states to assist a suicide. An important milestone in the euthanasia debate was the isolation of morphine in the 19th century and its widespread use as a pain-relieving agent, when the practice of analgesia or pain relief had become reasonably well established. Samuel Williams, a non-physician, began to advocate the use of these drugs not only to alleviate terminal pain, but also to intentionally end a patient's life. During the late 1800s, Williams' euthanasia proposal received some serious attention in the medical journals and at scientific meetings. Still, most physicians held the view that pain medication could only be administered to alleviate pain, but not to hasten death. However, by declining to operate on the newborn, Dr. Haiselden almost single-handedly managed to accomplish what other defenders of euthanasia before him had not. He not only got more Americans than ever before talking about euthanasia, but also won endorsements from numerous prominent figures. The publicity surrounding his professional conduct, briefly eclipsing news from World War I, inspired other Americans to speak out in favor of letting deformed infants die for the good of society, no matter how cold-hearted it might sound. Haiselden demonstrated how popular support for euthanasia was nurtured by a cultural climate punctuated by science, naturalism, and humanitarian reform. Meanwhile, a 1917 feature film titled The Black Stork was inspired by the sensational case of Dr. Harry Haiselden to dramatically express the anxieties people had about medicine and disability during this period. Disability was equated with disease, and doctors claimed absolute authority. Indeed, Haiselden's activities brought forth a storm of public controversy in which all of the currently popular attitudes towards disability were expressed. Nevertheless, many prominent thinkers, including Clarence Darrow and Helen Keller, argued that physicians had the right and the duty to decide whether a life was worth living. Although it was widely accepted that doctors should make these decisions and act on them in their private practices, it was rare that the subject was brought to the open in public. The dispute over mercy killing, after subsiding in the 1920s, caught fire again in the 1930s, making these years a pivotal juncture in the history of euthanasia in America. With the coming of the Depression and more troubled economic times, Americans began talking again about suicide and controlled dying. Public opinion polls indicated in 1937 that fully 45% of Americans had caught up with Harry Haiselden's belief that the mercy killing of infants born permanently deformed or mentally handicapped was permissible. However, when the 1940s dawned, many in the euthanasia movement believed it was only a matter of time before euthanasia became legal in the United States. But euthanasia advocates were in for a surprise as news of Nazi atrocities against patients suffering from mental illnesses and handicapped children filtered back to America. As word spread in the late 1940s, the euthanasia movement found itself increasingly on the defensive, scrambling to deny that the form of euthanasia it supported was the same as Nazi brutality. The World Medical Association, an international and independent confederation representing physicians worldwide, was founded in 1947 and voted to recommend that euthanasia be condemned under any circumstances in 1950. In the same year, the association issues a statement that the majority of doctors did not believe in euthanasia. When an opinion poll in 1950 asked Americans whether they approved of allowing physicians by law to end incurably ill patients' lives by painless means if they and their families requested it, only 36% answered yes, approximately 10% less than in the late 1930s. 2 years later, the British and American euthanasia societies submit a petition to the United Nations Commission on Human Rights to amend the UN Declaration of Human Rights to include the right of incurable sufferers to euthanasia or merciful death. Inasmuch as this right is, then, not only consonant with the rights and freedoms set forth in the Declaration of Human Rights, but also essential to their realization, we hereby petition the United Nations to proclaim the right of incurable sufferers to euthanasia. Eleanor Roosevelt, the chairperson of the commission, did not present the petition to the commission. In the early 1970s, the widely accepted authority of the medical profession came under concerted attack in the name of patient autonomy. This challenge has been embodied in the progressive enumeration of patient rights, especially the right to refuse medical care, even life-sustaining care. The goals have been to remove physicians from decision-making and to let individual patients weigh the benefits and burdens of continued life. In 1973, the American Hospital Association adopted a Patient's Bill of Rights, which recognized the right of patients to refuse treatment. In 1974, the euthanasia movement came to a turning point with 21-year-old Karen Ann Quinlan's unfortunate accident at a party. After doctors declared that she was in a persistent vegetative state, her parents went to court to have her respirator removed. The New Jersey Supreme Court ruled in 1976 that Karen Quinlan can be detached from her respirator. The case became a legal landmark, drawing national and international attention to end-of-life issues. By 1977, 8 states, California, New Mexico, Arkansas, Nevada, Idaho, Oregon, North Carolina, and Texas, had signed right-to-die bills into law. At the turn of the 21st century, countries like the Netherlands, Belgium, South Africa, and many American states like Washington, Vermont, and California started legalizing death with dignity. Most recently, more than 65% of New Zealanders voted in favor of legalizing physician-assisted suicide for terminally ill adults last year, and the law came into effect in New Zealand this month. The number of people who die this way is increasing, though still small. According to The Economist, the number of euthanized deaths in the Netherlands rose from roughly 1,800 in 2003 to nearly 7,000 in 2020, accounting for 4% of all deaths. As more countries liberalize, the global total will rise further. However, many are still in doubt about whether it is moral to let not only the individual but also doctors and family members to judge when one's suffering makes death seem an easier way out. More still question how individual discretion on euthanasia can be proven to have arisen from rational and logical thinking. Some also worry about whether the legalization of doctor-assisted suicide will encourage disengagement with palliative care and serve as a pressurizing trigger for the undecided. Despite all the hypothetical or substantial possibilities for abuse, whether the right to a dignified life warrants a right to a dignified end is still up to public debate in each society for decades to come. That's all for today's episode on the right to die. This episode was written by Tanfei, voiced by Melissa, produced by Isabella, and brought to you by Right the Wrongs under Verba Manent. The next episode of Right the Wrongs will air on Wednesday. You can find the program wherever you find your podcasts, bringing you detailed updates on pressing human rights issues. Till next time, take care!